Hey everybody, how are you doing? Welcome back. It's time to revise, and you can do it here with me today. We can do some forensic psychology, and we can look at Eysenck's criminal personality theory. Let's crack on. There you go, look, you've got some exam style questions there, you've got timings and stuff. Do something active with it, yeah? Here's a chance to pause the video. You can have a go, you can plan it, you can discuss it, whatever you want to do with it, but do something, and then come back, press play when you're ready for me to talk through. Okay, let's do it. Right, so we want to explain the terms neuroticism and extraversion. Now, it's only 2 marks for 2 brief explanations, so we don't need to go into too much depth here. But neuroticism basically is either about emotional instability or it's about experiencing or being likely to experience negative emotions. So some variation of that will be absolutely fine. Extraversion, on the other hand, is about being outgoing. So you could just keep it simple and say that, or you could say something along the lines of extraversion is about being risk-seeking or enjoying risks and danger. Something along those lines would be fine. Okay. Now we want to outline Eysenck's theory of the criminal personality for 3 marks more generally. Now, Eysenck's theory is basically the idea that criminals tend to have a certain kind of personality or certain personality traits. And he outlines 3 of these traits. Originally it was just 2, but he later added psychoticism. So to deal with this 3 marker, I would just basically talk through those 3 traits and say that criminals, according to Eysenck, are likely to be high in these personality dimensions. Okay, so extraversion and neuroticism we've already talked about. Psychoticism is about being aggressive and lacking empathy. Okay, now for 3 marks that's probably enough, but you could round it off at the end and talk about if this was maybe a 4 marker or even up to a 6 marker, start to talk about the link to criminality and maybe even some of the biological basis. So I'll just share some thoughts on that and then it's covered for when we come to the bigger questions. So in terms of the link between these personality traits and criminality, extraversion, if you're high in extraversion, yes, we said you are going to be seeking risks, maybe you're going to be looking for and enjoying danger. Well, where's the link? Well, because if you are highly extroverted, you're going to be maybe more likely to be going out and joining maybe gang activity or even just getting involved in fights and things like that, okay? I'm not saying that everybody that's outgoing is a criminal. But according to Eysenck, if you are extroverted, you are more likely to seek those kind of situations. Because, and this is where the biological bit comes in, because of, again, according to Eysenck, if you are extroverted, you have an under-aroused nervous system. So when you are engaging in those kind of risky behaviours, basically what you're doing is topping up that nervous system to be a bit more normal. Okay, that's why you're doing it. In terms of neuroticism, if it's about experiencing negative emotions, about being unstable or certainly less stable, then what that means is that you're going to be a bit more volatile and maybe you're going to kick off if somebody maybe looks at you the wrong way or says the wrong thing, or you're going to be more likely to overreact or initiate that kind of stress, fight or flight response, which would then lead to potentially violence. Yeah, so that's the neuroticism link. And in terms of psychoticism, hopefully it makes sense to say, if you've got somebody that maybe is lacking in empathy, they're not going to be able to see other people's points of view as easily. They're not going to worry so much about the consequences of their behaviour. They're less likely to feel guilt. And therefore, it makes sense, I think, to say they're more likely to offend. Anyway, there's lots of information there. In terms of a 3 marker, as I said, just a general statement about criminals being high in these 3 dimensions, and then just talk through the 3 dimensions. Okay, we've now got an application question, and we're talking about a violent character in a TV series. And the question is, referring to this stem, outline Eysenck's theory. Fine. So we've got 2 people talking about character. Brian is basically saying this person in the show, he's always on edge, looks like he can snap. That's signalling to me possibly that this character in the show is maybe a bit unstable. Maybe you could work in neuroticism there. You could link in what Mark is saying about the dad as well, because Eysenck said, and I didn't mention it a second ago, but it's something else that you could talk about. Eysenck also said that a lot of this personality, in terms of these traits, a lot of it is actually genetic, it's inherited. Yeah. Now, we tend to call Eysenck's theory a psychological explanation because it's about the personality. But he did recognise the role of biology as well and of inheritance, as I said. So you could link that in. If the dad is similar, you could work in that Eysenck, well, that's in line with Eysenck's theory that personality is largely inherited. And then Mark goes on to talk about you couldn't predict what he'd throw himself into next. So you could link that into this idea of maybe extraversion. If someone is, throwing themselves into different situations, that might suggest that they're maybe seeking risks or danger. Okay, so we've got several points there. The only other thing that's missing possibly is maybe trying to link in psychoticism. Possibly, it's not maybe the clearest in the stem there, but you could say, having a fight of any description is maybe linking in with that idea of aggression and possibly even, antisocial behaviour or even lack of empathy. But I think that aggressive side of it that is linked to psychoticism is a good way to get that AO2 in there as well. All right, that's that one. Now we want to discuss two criticisms of Eysenck's theory. So it's not as bad as it looks because it's two criticisms for 4 marks. So it's just going to be a very brief kind of point, explain, conclude kind of thing. Okay, so what is the limitation or what is the criticism and what's the implication of it, or, develop it a bit more. Okay, so what kind of things could we talk about? Well, one of the main criticisms of Eysenck's theory is that it's largely based on a personality questionnaire. So you could explain the issues with using questionnaire data. You're very much aware of that from other topics and a bit of common sense, I'm sure. You could talk about the fact that maybe it's based on the idea that a person's personality remains consistent over time. Yeah, criminals often go on to reoffend. So again, that's in line with the idea that the personality is kind of stable over time. But actually, certainly the modern kind of thinking on this is that personality isn't a fixed, stable kind of quantity. And you'll know yourselves that if you're with different people, maybe, at home versus with your friends or at school, you're probably going to behave and think slightly differently. You might almost have kind of different personas that kind of come out, depending on who you're with, depending on the situation, depending on how you're feeling. So this idea that, there are these fixed kind of traits like psychoticism and extraversion and neuroticism, it just doesn't really stack up to, when you think about it in terms of evidence and modern thinking on personality. Yeah, personality isn't this fixed, stable concept. So you could have a brief discussion about that. You could also go down the route of, since Eysenck talks about how a lot of this is innate, you could briefly discuss the implications of that and maybe talk about how it's ignoring free will. Maybe you could talk about the fact that maybe it's socially sensitive because people maybe that have a history of offending in their families are maybe going to be stereotyped, or people are going to be prejudiced against them. Yeah, and you could have a discussion about that. Okay, there's 3 ideas there. You could pick 2 of those. Right, now we've got an 8 marker. Fairly straightforward in terms of probably looking like a 4+4. So we want to outline the theory. I've already done that a couple of times. So a general statement about these kind of traits. You're going to explain the 3 traits and their link to offending. That's fine. And then for the 4 out of the 8, that are now going to be evaluation marks, I would say you're looking probably for 2 Peel-type paragraphs. We've already been through 3 different ideas, so I'm not going to say any more at that point because you've got plenty for an 8 marker. Yeah, knowledge paragraph, followed by 2 little evaluation paragraphs, aiming for level 4, aiming for 8 out of 8. Try and develop at least one of those a little bit. Maybe introduce a counter argument or a little bit more discussion about maybe the implications of your argument. Okay, we've now got a 16 marker. Now, I've just discussed Eysenck's theory, refer to an alternative. So it could be something like that. But that could easily have been discuss the theory, refer to the scenario. So in that case, it would have been a 6 plus 4 plus 6. So you could have a bash at that if you wanted to. And if that were the case, basically we're already doing what we've already covered in terms of the knowledge and the application. We just need to expand some of that a little bit more, maybe improve, maybe by putting a bit more knowledge and description in there. And that's where you might bring in, if this is now 6 marks of knowledge, you might bring in Eysenck's ideas about the link with socialization. So recognizing the role of both nature, because he said personality is inherited, and nurture. So how someone is socialized, how they're brought up. Yeah, because he said that people with these clusters of personality traits, particularly with combination of being high in extraversion and neuroticism, he said they're actually very difficult to condition. So what that means is that they don't really learn right from wrong. They don't learn when they're punished. They don't learn from consequences. So that is all going on as well as having these traits. Yeah, not only are they, risk-seeking, not only are they unstable, not only are they lacking in empathy and they're aggressive, but they also don't learn from their mistakes and don't learn from punishment. Yeah, so you've got all of that going on. So that's knowledge. If we come back to the question I've actually written, discuss and then refer to an alternative. For a 16 marker, I tend to go for 3 discussion paragraphs, trying to develop and trying to have a counter-argument in at least a couple of those. We've already talked about a few ideas, so you could discuss the fact that it's based on a questionnaire. And you could, if you felt like it, maybe start with that being a strength. Yeah, we're trying to quantify these traits so that we can compare and do averages and all of that sort of thing, do some analysis. Maybe you're going to say that it's good that it's a questionnaire because you're able to access, these internal states and traits that are, otherwise impossible to kind of measure because they're all internal, unobservable things. So you could say maybe that's good, and then develop that with a counter-argument and talk about maybe the risks of using questionnaires. That would be good. You could talk about evidence. So Eysenck has himself, and I think possibly with his wife, he's done a couple of studies on offenders and supported, unsurprisingly of course because it's his own theory, and supported this link between these 3 traits and offending. Yeah, so gone into look at offending populations and done these tests, the Eysenck personality inventory. He's done it with offenders and he's found that they are indeed high in these personality traits. So that's supporting evidence. You could then counter that with the fact that other people haven't always been able to replicate this. There's a study I read about by Van Dam et al. That was done, I think it was about 15-20 years ago now, and they found actually only a minority of offenders in their sample were high on these 3 traits. So it doesn't support. It's a lack of replicability. There's a lack of reliability in terms of the evidence base for Eysenck's theory. So you can have a 2-sided discussion about that if you wanted to. We've already talked about the fact that personality isn't stable or consistent over time, and about how people have maybe these different kind of persona that depend on the situation as well. So you could talk about that. I mentioned earlier as well, if you wanted a different 3rd or even a 4th point now, you could talk about the implications of saying personality is innate. Again, I mentioned that earlier. So I think you've got lots of different points there. Okay. I suppose another idea that you might have thought of is maybe a limitation, and that might be the lack of applications that come out of this theory. Okay, fine, I can, give people these questionnaires and I can identify maybe a link between these traits and criminality, but can I actually do anything useful with that? Are there any therapies? Are there any treatments that come out of this? No, not really. I can't change their personality, yeah? Eysenck said it was innate. There's not really much I can do about that. Could I use it maybe to preempt crime? Maybe children in all schools should do these tests at age 12 or age 16 or whatever. And people that are high in these 3 traits, should we lock them up? Yeah, so that they don't offend, because they're going to offend, aren't they, according to Eysenck? Well, no, of course we can't. So my argument here is that maybe one limitation of this theory is that there aren't really many useful applications of it. It's just describing, well, it's not even describing really, is it? It's just quantifying people's personalities, yeah, and describing a link between offending and these traits. Okay, lots of ideas there. Probably bored of listening to me by this point. Hopefully that was useful though. All right, time to reflect. How did that go for you? Why did it go that way? What was good? What wasn't? Why? And what do you need to do or not do next? Right, that brings us to the end of this one. That was me discussing the theory of the criminal personality by Hans Eysenck. I hope that was helpful for you guys. Let me know how you're getting on in the comments, if you've got anything to add or to question. And yeah, I'll see you in another video. Keep it up. Bish bash bosh.